Now Watts, after some weeks, the printer master of this printing house, wants Ben moved from the typesetting room to the composing room. So he soon acquired a considerable influence in the composing room, being, intelligent as he was. From my example, a great many of them left their muddling breakfast of beer, bread, and cheese, finding that they could with me be supplied from a neighboring house. And he got this mix of porridge and hot water gruel from the neighboring house, and it was cheaper than what they had bought, and they gave up on the beer. This was a more comfortable as well as a cheaper breakfast, and kept their heads clearer. Those who continued sotting with their beer all day were often, by not paying, out of credit at the alehouse. So that's when he got 3 shillings a week on each of their accounts, he says. Good to have a little extra money when other people run out, huh? At Watt's printing house, I contracted an acquaintance with an ingenious young man, one Wygate, who, having wealthy relations, had been better educated than most printers. And he says he taught this guy, Wygate, and his friend, to swim, just going into the river twice with them. And they were on this boat from Don Salteros to Chelsea. And Ben says, I stripped and leaped into the river and swam from near Chelsea to Blackfriars, performing in the way many feats of activity, both upon and under the water, and surprised and pleased those to whom they were novelties. So he was actually pretty good at swimming, and he's kind of popularized it. He says, I had from childhood been delighted with this exercise, had studied and practiced Thevenot's motions and positions, and added some of my own, aiming at the graceful and easy as well as the useful. So he says, this Mr. Wygate, he says, I must record one trait of this good man's character. He had formerly been in business at Bristol, but failed in debt to a number of people, compounded, and went to America. Compounded means, I guess, put his debts into smaller amounts and paid the men off. Some sort of bankruptcy compromise payment. So he says the guy then went to America. Returning to England after a few years after making a fortune with me, he invited his old creditors to an entertainment at which he thanked them for the easy composition that they had favored him with, and when they expected nothing but the treat, meaning the meal, every man at the first remove found under his plate an order on a banker for the amount of the unpaid remainder with interest. So this guy calls all his old creditors in and says, sorry about defaulting on what I owe you, and if you look under your dinner plate, you'll find something, and there's their payment. I now took leave of printing, as I thought forever, and was daily employed in my new business, going about with Mr. Denham among the tradesmen to purchase various articles and see them packed, delivering messages, calling upon the workmen to dispatch, etc. And when all was on board, I had a few days' leisure. Thus I passed about 18 months in London. Most part of the time I worked hard at my business and spent but little upon myself, except in seeing plays and in books. My friend Ralph had kept me poor. He owed me about £27. So he talks about things that happened in London and his life there, and now he's on a boat to Philadelphia, and he says one last thing he has to mention about the good things that he did while he was in London. I read considerably. So we're on to chapter 4 now, and he talks about, he says, we sailed from Gravesend on the 23rd of July, 1726, and he says perhaps the most important part of the journey across the sea was the journal entry, which contained his plan. The plan to be found in this journal he framed at sea for regulating the future of his life. And he says, it is the more remarkable a plan as being formed when I was so young and yet being pretty faithfully adhered to quite through to old age. So he just mentions that, and then there's a footnote, and the footnote says, this plan does not exist in the manuscript journal found among Dr. Franklin's papers, which appears by a note thereon to be a, quote, copy made at Reading in Pennsylvania, October 2nd, 1787. So Whatever the case may be, he didn't include the plan here, and we haven't found the plan among his notes with his original writings on the biography. So who knows what the plan consisted of. Maybe it has been found or something, but I haven't heard of it, and it's not here. We landed at Philadelphia the 11th of October. Keith was no longer governor. I actually met him walking the streets as a common citizen, and he seemed a little ashamed at seeing me, and passed without saying anything. Now, what about Miss Reed, the young lady he was engaged to, I believe? Miss Reed had married a guy named Roger, a potter, but she was never happy with him and soon parted. She wouldn't take his name or live with him or anything. As for Chimere, he had gotten a better house, a shop well supplied with stationery, plenty of new types, and he seemed to have a great deal of business. Mr. Denham, the gentleman we talked about earlier, took a store on Water Street. I attended the business diligently, studied accounts, and grew in a little time expert at selling. We lodged and boarded together. He counseled me as a father, having sincere regard for me. I respected him and loved him, and we might have gone on together very happily. But in the beginning of February 1727, when I had just passed my 21st year, he just turns 21 years old, we both were taken ill. Now this is an interesting part right here, because he says, get this, he was disappointed to recover at one point. He was so ill that when he found himself he was going to recover, he talked himself into dying. He says, my distemper was a pleurisy, I don't know how to pronounce that, P-L-E-U-R-I-S-Y, which very nearly carried me off. I suffered a good deal, gave up the point in my own mind, and was at the time rather disappointed when I found myself recovering, regretting in some degree that I must now, sometime or other, have all that disagreeable work to go over again. In other words, he thought he's done with it. He doesn't have to work from day to day. He doesn't have to do things anymore. He's finished. And then he found himself recovering. Oh no, he has to go back to life. Oh my goodness. I forget what Mr. Denham's distemper was. It held him a long time, and at length carried him off. He left me a small legacy in his nuncupative will as a token of his kindness for me, and he left me once more to the wide world. For the store was taken into the care of his executors, and my employment under him ended. So that's it. They just got the store set up and started, and his business partner dies. So Ben goes where? He closed again with Chimere. Closed means made a contract for labor with Chimere. So he's back with the guy who he had been with before, and Chimere had actually offered him high wages, and he looked around the town a little bit and couldn't find any prospects, especially not the high wages Chimere was offering. So he goes to Chimere's printing house, and he finds there's these 5 or 6 employees. Chimere's got these workers contracted at really pitifully low wages, on the condition that if for each quarter that they stay there, their wage will increase by a certain amount. The wages were really low, and they were increased by a shilling per quarter or whatever, some agreed time span. They would increase the weekly wage by a shilling, and if the employee had improved themselves in their business, had gotten to be better at what they do. So he's got all these employees sorting around who don't like him. Chimere is not a very happy guy, as it is. Anyways, Ben says, I soon perceived that the attention of getting me at wages so much higher than he had been used to give was to have these raw, cheap hands formed through me. Right? So Chimere's like, oh, Ben, you're back? He thinks, wow, I could have Ben just come work in my place for a few months or a year and get all my guys in good shape, and then I'll be done with them. So it was to have these raw, cheap hands formed through me, and as soon as I had instructed them, he should be able to do without me. I went into this, however, very cheerfully, put into his printing house put it in order, which had been in great confusion, and brought his hands by degrees to mind their business and to do it better. Now, Chimere starts getting resentful of the high wages he's paying, and he starts being more